many familiar faces and all the rock stars across the state. I remember when I started, in August, I didn't know a lot of you, and now I'm looking around the room, and I know many of you already, so I'm really excited by this. For those of you who I have not yet met, my name is Dr. Christine Harrington. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Student Success, and I'm just thrilled to be in this position to help you with all of the hard work that you're doing at your colleges to really engage everyone in this Guided Pathways movement. And I'm incredibly appreciative because I know many of you are on spring break this week. So I know this was a giant sacrifice for you to be here, and I'm so appreciative that you find the advising topic to be of such significance to you that you are able to carve out time. And I also am grateful for your patience because, as you know, we had to reschedule this event because of that awful snowstorm that I kept watching saying, no, not that day. And no, and it was supposed to be 1 to 3, and actually Melinda and I were talking a few days before, and I'm like, we're seeing something, but it looks like it's going to be nothing. And then as the days went on, it was like 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 5 to 8. I'm like, oh my, this is not looking good. So anyway, I'm just really glad that the snow we had this week was earlier this week and not today. Very thrilled that we didn't have to reschedule because I was starting to panic once again. And I'm incredibly grateful to Melinda for juggling her schedule so that we could find a date, which was not an easy task. She's a busy gal, as are we. So I just want to thank you all for being here today. It's really an honor to be a part of this really important work that we're all doing. Okay, so before I get started, I just want to remind you all about the mission for the Center for Student Success. Our primary goal really is to support all of the work that's happening at the 19 community colleges, and I'm thrilled that we have 17 of our 19 colleges represented here today. So just absolutely thrilled by that. The commitment is so strong. And I also want to welcome several of the colleges into the New Jersey cohort. So as many of you know, we have a Guided Pathways cohort, and initially we had 13 colleges sign on to be a part of that. We're now up to 17 colleges in New Jersey that are committed to the Guided Pathways work. So we'll welcome some of our newcomers. We have folks from Salem, we have folks from Bergen, we have folks from Essex, and we have folks from Ocean now on board. So everybody please give them a big warm welcome. Yay! Okay. So you know about our mission. You know that everything we do is really framed by the Guided Pathways movement, really supporting you and the work that you're doing. So we've been spending a lot of time talking about how do we create clear paths for our students. We're also spending a lot of time about how do we help our students choose and enter a path in a very smooth way and stay on that path. And that's really kind of what we're doing today. So we're focusing a lot on the advising component and how do we help students really choose, enter a path. This is not obviously the only conversation we're going to have about this. We had a conversation back in October where we had Chris Baldwin and Andrea Hunsko who's here with us again today. So I certainly want to give a shout out to JFF. Their commitment to helping the New Jersey Center for Student Success is just so commendable. So if everybody could join me in welcoming Andrea Hunsko also today. JFF is in the house. We are really appreciative of their support and ongoing collaboration really with our work here in New Jersey. So as I said before, this is not a one-time conversation. We've been having dialogue. Today we're going to further the dialogue. You'll see that we're going to continue this conversation. It extends above and beyond what we're accomplishing today. So today is one piece along the entire path that we're taking to help our students really have successful experiences. Oops, a little too fast. As you know, there are 13, are we officially at 14 yet or no? 13? Okay, so we're still, I know there's like maybe a 14 one coming in the mix soon, but we're officially one of 13 states that are a part of this national network. So Jobs for the Future, we are really very well supported by them. They are working very closely with the 13 states. And New Jersey, I can't even tell you how proud I am to be a part of New Jersey because we were one of the first 3 states to get funding through the Kresge Foundation and also one of the few who got that second round of funding to really help us do this difficult, challenging, but very important work. So as a part of this network, we have support systems like Andrea and Chris Baldwin, who you met in October, who work with me constantly, to help me support you. So we are just incredibly grateful to be a part of this big national movement, and New Jersey is really at the forefront of this. So you should be very proud of the work that we're doing here. So what we're going to start off with, you have an agenda in your packet. I just want to bring your attention to two things. One is outside of your folder, on your tables, you'll see that there are some papers here that say Advising Career Technology Survey. So what I'm asking you to do for this, you can do this either during your work group session time now or lunch or at any time throughout the day. This I want you to complete individually. Okay, is everybody with me? The papers that are on the table outside of your folder, this is an individual exercise because although you may all have the same resources available, you may be using them in different ways. And we want to get a sense of how you're using resources related to advising and career, the technology resources I'm speaking about. So you do not need to put your name on this, but if you can hand this to Donna Rogowski on your way out, and by the way, I don't know if she's still standing out there, but oh my God, Donna Rogowski, is she not amazing? Like, she just give her a giant round of applause. She is just phenomenal. I really couldn't do this job without her. There she is. Say let's do it again. Donna Rogowski. She has, she makes all the magic happen behind the scenes and really is just a significant help to me and hopefully to all of you. So that's one piece that we'll need from you at some point throughout the day. But what we're going to do now, the agenda really is we're going to start off with a tape. You're seated with colleagues from your table. If you happen to not have a lot of colleagues with you right now, I know some folks are running late, some of you only have a couple of representatives that are able to come. You can partner up with somebody else nearby, that's fine. But this morning breakout session really is for you to talk among your colleagues at your institution about what advising currently looks like. So in your folder, you will see that there is a document that looks like this. It says current snapshots of advising at your institution. And we're going to give you a little bit of time to work at your tables. So if we can try to do that in the next 20 to 30 minutes, if you need a little bit more time, we'll give that to you. What I need from you as a takeaway is one of you are going to write the college name at the top and hand that in. So I need one per college. Now you should also you have multiple copies at your table, so you should have some for your records also. So you don't want to give me all of your copies, you just want to give me one copy from your institution. Before we break, I'm just going to walk through the agenda for the day. So we're going to start off with this morning conversation, helping you kind of take a deeper look at what does advising currently look like. That's going to kind of get you primed and ready to go when we have Dr. Melinda Cart start her presentation around 10:45-ish or so, and she's going to talk to you about different advising models. So her presentation is slated for about an hour and 15 minutes or so. She certainly wants to make sure that she can attend to your questions. After her presentation, we'll take a break for lunch. Then we have one of our own, Kelly Slade, who is going to talk to us about how they have really transformed advising at Cumberland County College. And then this afternoon, you're going to have time to work again at your tables with your colleagues from your institution to really think about what Melinda and what Kelly have shared about the different models, and you'll get an opportunity to view those models from the student perspective in terms of what works, what doesn't work, what the advantages and disadvantages of the different approaches are, as well as from the institutional lens. Okay, now let's look at the reality of what we have to work with here at your place, and what are some of those roadblocks, what are some of those things that are going to make that be successful. At the end of the day, we have some take-home assignments for you. So you have some follow-up sheets in there. Those are not something that you need to turn into me. They are really for you as a support. I've heard from a lot of you that you wanted some ideas about how to carry the momentum of what happens at an institute back home with you to your college, and to talk and bring the others who were not able to be here today into the conversation and into the dialogue. So that kind of gives you the setup for the day. Does anyone have any questions before we break into the first working session? Okay, well with that said, you folks are going to have, again, about 20 to 30 minutes or so to work on what does currently advising look like at your table. And then Donna or Andrea or I will be around to collect those. We'll be also floating around to answer any questions that you might have. All right. You can hang on to your paper if you didn't finish yet. We'll come and collect it during the lunch break, or you can come and bring it to us during the lunch break. But I don't want to, kind of continue on that task because we have some other really important things to do. In particular, we have a special guest with us, Dr. Melinda Karp from the CCRC, and I just can't even begin to tell you how incredibly thankful I am to Melinda. We've had several conversations, and she's talking the talk. I love to talk, and I think you're going to really find today to be just an incredible opportunity for you to think really about what is advising, what is it that we're doing, what kinds of models work best, how do we really need to reimagine and revise what we're doing in order to best meet our students' needs. So my guess is that you're not going to walk away today with all of the answers, but she's probably going to get you thinking deeply really about academic advising and career planning and what that looks like. And you will then this afternoon after lunch have an opportunity to talk amongst your colleagues about all the material that Melinda shares with you. So I don't want to take up any more of Melinda's time, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Melinda Karp. And I'm going to go plug your,
Okay. All right, you won't have answers. That much I can promise you. I'm sorry. My job is often to create questions and a little bit of anxiety, actually, and then your job is to figure out how to fix it all. Sorry. And I say that actually with deep love, respect, and excitement. So for those of you who don't know me, Melinda Karp, I'm an assistant director at the Community College Research Center up at Teachers College, Columbia University, which is that way, I think? Anyway, New York. I have spent a long time studying various pieces of how students persist and complete in college that happen outside of the classroom. And for probably the first 10 or 12 years, I felt like I was tilting at windmills. Everyone was like, oh yeah, those advisors, they do that thing in the corner, it's kind of important, but really it's the faculty. We teach. And I love faculty, I love teaching, I was a teacher. But I kept feeling like, but we have all these students who can read and write and think, and they're still dropping out. So what's going on? And those of you who work in this space are probably with me that like sometimes it's not what's happening in the classroom, it's everything else. So I am incredibly gratified that I no longer tilt at windmills trying to prove that this matters. People are open and ready to hear it and do some pretty hard work around redesigning what we mean and how we do our work when we talk about advising and student support. And I will say that I do have a pretty strong point of view that for all sorts of reasons outside of anyone's purview and for that make some sort of sense, much of what we currently do is not working for students. And I will say that knowing that there are a ton of people who work their tushes off to make it work for students within some structures, some norms that end up being counterproductive. And so my fundamental argument is we need to take what we've done, we have evidence that it's not working for students despite our best efforts, and rethink that. So I don't mean that in a way that sort of demeans or undermines the hard work that is happening. The argument is that that hard work is not getting the outcomes that it should, and that's because we need to rethink how we set up and reframe our systems and processes. And I want to be very open about that. So the argument is that we need reform, but it's not because of anyone in this room. It's because there's some dysfunction that has grown up for many reasons. And that's same with whether we talk about guided pathways, whether we talk about pedagogy. I think there's a fundamental assumption these days that we're really working hard and we're not seeing the bumps in completion that we'd want. And that's because there are some structures that worked really well in the 60s and they don't work now. And so we need to rethink that. And by the way, that's really hard, which is why you won't have answers when you leave. But hopefully you'll have some thoughts about what will come from that. So just to move on, for those of you who don't know CCRC, I don't like to assume that everyone, even in a guided pathways-oriented meeting, knows who we are. As I said, we are at Teachers College. We just finished celebrating our 20th birthday. Last year, we were founded to study community colleges. And over the years, that has evolved to just creating research to thinking about how do we use that research. So we're very much focused on identifying those challenges I just mentioned and then figuring out what the evidence tells us about how to improve them, because fundamentally we believe that community colleges are a critical engine for social mobility in this country, and we want them to be as well-functioning as possible. We have a very large research portfolio. A lot of this now talks about guided pathways in various ways. We're pretty big in the guided pathways movement, although we think that it can always be improved. Much of what we do we call knowledge development. So we sit there and we look at the evidence, we figure out, okay, here's our best answer for what we know. We're going to feed that back out to the field, whether that's colleges or funders or policymakers. You're going to tell us where we're right. You're going to try out some of our ideas, and we're going to keep testing that and iterating it and improving it. So we do some formal evaluation. This works, this doesn't, but a lot of what we do is a little bit more iterative, sort of learning as we go in hand with people who are doing the work. But we always try and adhere to the best principles of research where we let the data take us where it takes us, even if we don't like the answer. So the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the context for guided pathways and advising redesign. And I will admit that this is actually an area where we have some spirited debates in our office. Do the pathways come first? Can you do advising redesign without guided pathways? My answer often is, I think all of it is important. Some places are going to be much more open to starting with advising. Some places are going to be more open to starting with program mapping. But at the end of the day, the two, I can't talk with this microphone, I talk with my hands, sorry, are two sides of the same coin, right? So if you're going to talk pathways, it's a lot easier to do that if you're also thinking about how you advise and support students. We see a lot of colleges that are like, oh, we're just going to redesign student supports, and very quickly realize that it's a lot easier to do that if you have a clear program map. So I want to just quickly talk about what this looks like. So most of you have probably seen some version of this slide. You know that when we talk about a guided pathways approach, we're essentially talking about clarifying curricular paths so that students, faculty, support staff, everybody knows what those paths are and can keep students on them. So we consider there are four sort of critical components to a guided pathways reform. They are not going to look identical in every institution, but you want to clarify those paths so students know where they're going and how to get where they want to go. You want to help students get on that path, right? So now if I have 10 meta majors, let's pretend, I know which meta major makes sense for me given my interests and goals. You want to then make sure the students stay on the path, because the whole point is we don't want you wandering off and taking 122 credits when you really needed 65. And then we want to make sure you're actually learning something on the path, because that's usually the whole point of the exercise, right? Now, all of these touch on advising and student support, but the two in purple, I think, are most explicitly focused on advising, right? If you want to help students get on a path, you're talking about career advising. You're talking about exploration, development, understanding the labor market. If I choose option A versus option B, what does that do to my employment prospects down the line? Keeping students on a path is making sure they're on it. That's advising. Are you taking the courses you need to get to where you want to go? But it's also all the other pieces of support that sometimes get shuttled into a different office than academic advising. It's single stop. It's emergency aid. It's the counseling. It's understanding if you fall off a path, you're not making progress in your course. That could be because you actually hate your major. It could be because you're homeless. It could be all sorts of reasons. And I can't keep you on that path until I know the answer, right? So one of the things that I love about these kinds of reforms is that it knits together things that intuitively we kind of know should fit together, right? Like it's never made sense, and I'm a qualitative researcher. I've talked to hundreds of students over the years. For them, the fact that the career center's there, the advisors are there, maybe the counselors are there, and oh, by the way, the transfer center's over there, makes no sense. It makes sense to the people who set it up that way because you've got different funding streams or different functionalities, et cetera. But from a student's point of view, it makes no sense. Because if I want to figure out my path and then figure out how to stay on it, those aren't discrete things. Those are conversations about career selection and what does that mean for my courses. And if I'm off track, is it because of the academics and I need to go back to rethinking about which career I chose, or is it because I need to go have some mental health assistance? It's not a bunch of discrete functionalities. It's a single ongoing conversation. So part of what we talk about when we talk about this redesign is that if you start focusing and keeping students on a path, you need to rethink all those structures you were just talking about for the past half hour, because keeping students on a path is an iterative, ongoing process. So again, just to reframe this, if you take the same buckets and you think about the questions that students ask, each of those 4 buckets touch on advising questions, as I just said. So clarifying the path is pretty obvious. Students want to know what their path is, right? They want to know what to take. Getting on a path, what are my career options? What happens if I run into trouble? What do I do? Staying on a path, first of all, guided pathways is really nice because it lets you know if you're on or off. When we didn't have guided pathways, students weren't totally sure. Now, theoretically, they are. But it's also, how can I get help? How can people reach out to me? And then finally, learning. And this is, I'd say, the place we're still working. But as we start to integrate learning objectives and support or advising objectives, we can start to see that part of these questions are, am I learning what I'm supposed to be learning? And that can be part of the advising conversation. So we consider advising and student support as the architecture, because if these are the questions students ask, here are the functionalities of advising and student support that touch on it. Program planning, counseling, early alerts, analytics. They all, not perfectly, but I made them perfect for sake of this slide, map onto these guided pathways objectives or areas. So I want to be very clear, too, that we're driving towards a particular vision of student support, or at least I am and my team in our research. And this is rooted in a lot of the previous research we've done over the past 15 or so years, both literature reviews and our own independent work. We know from the evidence that students are successful when they have the type of support that we have not very elegantly called SIP. It stands for sustained, strategic, integrated, and proactive and personalized advising. So if you look across the literature on what makes students successful, whether it's Vincent Tinto, whether it's empirical work, and you're teasing out why an intervention worked, you end up in this place where supports that are sustained over time, not a one-shot deal, where they are strategic, which means that I treat you a little bit differently than you because your needs are different, right? Where they're integrated, so they're connected, what I was talking about before, and they're proactive, so we're not waiting until you're about to flunk out. That's what's going to get you to success. And again, I'm probably not telling you something you don't know. This is something that people in this space know. But if you think about what SIP would look like in an ideal world and what we are able to do in the current structure of most colleges, we don't necessarily get there. So it's really nice to have this image in your head of what we want to achieve, right? I mean, the idea that, I know why we do this, okay? But this idea that we're going to inoculate students against failure by giving them a shot of support in their first semester, and then we're going to let them self-advise the rest of the way. It doesn't work. Like, it works great with my kids in chickenpox. It does not work so well when you're talking about a student who the help that they needed that first semester may be very different than 2 semesters down the line, right? People need ongoing support. Now, we've got capacity issues. I'm going to talk about that. So I'm not saying like, oh yeah, why don't you do this? I totally know why you do this. We've got ratios that make no sense. But when you think about the literature and you think about what you're driving towards and you think about redesigning what you do, remembering that the evidence is really clear that we need sustained support is useful for thinking about how do I get there? Similarly with proactive or with integrated, any of these. So this is the image of what we are driving towards, rooted not just in the fact that intuitively I think we know this, but also the evidence is pretty clear. So I want to back up, and this is going to be a little redundant because you did this exercise, but I want to sort of contextualize what you were doing for the past half hour or so and talk about how advising is currently structured. And the reality is it's a little bit messy. To say the structure of advising, I don't know. because most colleges have multiple structures happening simultaneously. But I want to talk a little bit about the advising structures, because that will help us, again, think about, well, what would we do that's a little bit different? So you can think of dimensions of student support, or the way we set up advising, as actually being 3 kinds of setups at the same time. The first is just, how is it structured? How is it set up? How is it viewed? Which is basically, whose job is it? What do we think of it? And how is it delivered? What's the approach we take in that sort of one-on-one conversation? So how is it viewed? We'll start there, because this is back to my beginning of tilting at windmills thing. In some places, you can imagine advising and student support are a core activity. This is what we do. In some places, maybe not, right? In some places, it's the purview of those specialists back in that center over there. And in some places, it becomes the purview of everybody, from faculty to specialists to the registrar to the custodian. That really changes some decisions, right? Because we've been talking a lot about budgets in this country over the past couple of days. If budgets are part of your values, if you believe that advising is just the purview of some specialists, your budget's going to look a little different than if you believe that a core activity of a college is to provide holistic support for students. So this view of what advising and student support are and can be actually matter a lot, because if you don't budget or structure your norms around making this the job of everybody, it's going to be a lot harder to move from advising happens in the corner to the support is something everybody does kind of approach. So it matters, because it shows up in structures. And by that I mean, how is it organized? How is it staffed? And how consistent is it? So we've got structures where, and this is the part where when you read the literature, this is what you often hear about. Is it centralized or decentralized or a hybrid? Which is important. Although I think the evidence is pretty mixed on which one's best. People often ask me that. You know, I think there's some context that matters. Best is not always a one answer when you're a researcher. Same with staffing. You can staff it through faculty advisors. You can staff it through generalists. You can staff it with discipline-specific advisors. You can have hybrids. You can do all sorts of things. And we often do, often because of resource constraints. And then you can have consistency. So we don't think about this, but when you talk to students, this becomes pretty obvious. Some places, advising is very consistent. Consistently good or consistently bad, but consistent. Everyone gets the same thing, right? Some places it's voluntary, which means the students who probably need it the least are the ones who get it. Some places it's mandatory. Some places, students in certain programs get like amazing advising and everybody else doesn't. And then it's, are you lucky enough to have found that program? That is the one that breaks my heart when I talk to students, because it feels really almost unfair. Again, capacity often is part of this, but when we think about structure, it's useful to think about how consistent are we. We want all of our students to have an experience that will work for them, and often it may not, because we have specialized advisors or we have walk-in advisors, and if you happen to get a really great one that day, you're in luck, and if you don't, maybe you can come back. If you're a student, that will make you unhappy. And then finally, the delivery. And when I talk about delivery, again, I'm talking about a couple of things here. The approach. Are we focused on prescriptive versus developmental versus coaching? The content. Does the content of that session or that information that you're giving focus on providing information? Does it focus on developing skills? Does it focus on building metacognitive skills so that students can self-advise effectively down the line? I think most of you know this, and you probably can say, well, we really should be doing advising and teaching. We should be doing cognitive development and affective support. But if you think about what happens, that may not always be what occurs. And I think that's important to keep in mind. We see when we talk to students and advisors that often, despite, I sometimes say it's been socialized out of us because of the structures and the rush at the beginning of the semester, we do sort of prescriptive information provision rather than developmental skills development. Again, not because we don't want to do the good stuff, but because when you've got a line, I mean, I've been in colleges where students wait for 7 hours to get registration advice. 7 hours. Don't tell me they're not motivated to be there, right? But don't tell me that they're getting really good cognitive development in that meeting either. They're just not. So we need to think about delivery not just in terms of who's delivering it, but what is being delivered and how. And again, if you layer this onto this SIP idea that comes from the research, you start to get a vision of what we want to drive towards, right? Your SIP's prescriptive information provision in a group may not get you to SIP. It might, but probably not. So you know this. I'm going to reiterate it one more time. In most colleges, and I know this isn't true for everyone, and I know we don't like it, and it's nobody's fault, but in most colleges, we'd end up with a place where most students have ad hoc advising with a first-year focus. Everything after that's kind of voluntary, and it's very temporal. Oh, you hit 15 credits, you better come in. Well, some students need help at 15 credits, some students don't, right? What we find is that advisors end up, particularly at those busy times of the semester, serving as registration clerks. That doesn't leverage their training, it doesn't make them happy, it doesn't make students happy, but that's what happens because that 7-hour line just has to get managed. And students, at the end of it, still have all the questions they started with. What path am I supposed to be on? The advisors don't know if they're on the path or not because there's no mechanism to really understand that in a 7-minute meeting, right? They don't know how to help this student. That personalization goes away. We hear a lot from students, well, they just gave me a formula. They just told me what they tell every first-year student. And again, they probably did for very good reason. But the students want to feel special. Even if the advice for the triple developmental student is the same across the board, they want to feel like it's tailored for them. And I can't blame them. And we know from the evidence that that matters. So they're left with the same questions. So that's the bummer part of the presentation. We're going to move on to the constructive part. Because the question is, well, what do you do about it, right? We're all here because we know that this is not ideal. We wouldn't have set this system up if we had a chance to start from the beginning. And now we have this opportunity to do the really hard work of transformation, right? We're going to do guided pathways. We're going to do advising redesign. What do we do? I want to argue that doing this kind of reform, moving from that system that I just described to something that meets the needs of students is what we call transformative change. That means that it is big, it is hairy, it is ugly, it is hard, and if you can pull it off, it's pretty awesome, okay? So, when we say transformative change, we mean that we are going to go from registration clerks to personalized sustained support. The way you're going to do that is by blowing up in a really good way, like not a scary way, a good way, everything you do in student support. You're going to get to assigned advisors, and everyone goes, oh my God, our caseload's going to be so huge, but that's going to be okay, because you're going to figure it out. I'm not going to tell you exactly how, because your college will be different, but you're going to figure it out. You're going to do developmental advising and case management, because you're going to be able to, partly because you're doing guided pathways. You're going to start shifting to student support becoming an institutional priority. So you're going to be doing a bunch of things at the same time. And that's when everyone goes, oh my God, crazy lady, go back to your ivy-covered walls and stop talking to us. We've got to go back and deal with our lines. You can make it happen. It's just going to be hard. If you think about this, all organizations have 3 dimensions to them. You have structures. That's how you built the walls. You've got the attitudes, the norms, like how we view the world. And you've got the processes. What happens every day when you come to work or you talk to a student? Transformative change, I hate to tell you this, deals with all 3 of those at the same time. Yay, it's really fun. And shifting from what we have to SIP is transformative, because if you go back to this, if you assigned advisors, you just changed your structures. If you shift to developmental advising and case management, you just changed your behaviors. I make it sound so easy, don't I? And if you shift to student support as an institutional priority, you've shifted your norms. And if you pull that off, you get to a place where students feel very differently about their experiences, and you get to do things like keep them on a path to graduation. And if you're in a state with things like performance-based funding, you might get more money, and that's a good thing. So, the other way to think about this, and you cannot read this, and that's okay, it's in a lot of reports. Basically what I did was I took the structures, the processes, and the attitudes, and you can map yourself, and we have colleges do this sometimes. We also do this as a data exercise to measure change. To what extent are your structures focusing on enrollment? that would be red. We only care about getting students in. I've been in colleges where like that's all they care about. To our policies and procedures, support SIP. Same thing for processes and attitudes. And you can sort of map yourself, sort of roughly. And what's really fun is if then you come back in a year and you try and remap yourself, because then you can start to see that progress, right? So how do we move along that continuum? And that's what we're aiming for. What's important to point out when we talk about transformation is that you do need to move the needle on all three. And the reason for that, and I'm going to blame K-12 for a second in my example, only because I used to teach there and I'll stop picking on you guys for a sec, is if you change the structures, right, but you don't change the processes, from the point of view of a student, nothing's changed. So for example, in K-12, we see this a lot. We're going to do a new reform. So the teachers go get trained. They put up a new poster with some new buzzwords on their wall. Then they roll their eyes and do everything they've done before, and then we wonder why scores haven't changed. Because we changed the structures, but we didn't change the processes. The flip side of that is you as an individual can change your behaviors. You can shift to case management, maybe. You can do developmental advising. But if you don't change the structures and the norms that support that through the whole institution, so that you have, say, a technology system that enables information sharing and case management, the students who have you as your advisor will be absolutely having a better experience. But as a college, you're not going to see a change in outcomes because it's not permeating everybody else's experience, right? And that's what we often see is like, but this teacher's amazing. How come the school scores aren't rising? It's like, well, it didn't get big enough. The water didn't boil. It's just one little dot. So you have to do all of it together if you want to see those big bumps that we're driving towards. Just fixing one is not going to get you where we want to go. And I actually think a lot of the frustration around stagnant completion rates is because we've been very focused on piloting things, which means that, 100 students are absolutely getting a better education, but 100 out of how many students, right? And then we don't see aggregate rises in completion. So we need to be attentive to all three pieces. And I say that knowing full well that that is really, really hard. It's also scary. You're also going to get a lot of pushback. We spend a lot of time managing that. But I do think that if we're attentive to all three, when you get to the other side, you are going to see a different kind of experience for students, which is ultimately how you're going to get to improve completion rates. You're going to put the students at the center. So you can't read that either, sorry. Basically, this is just, we've been doing this work for a really long time. I spend a lot of time thinking about this, starting back with some really in-depth literature reviews about 7 years ago, moving into a series of studies looking at advising redesign. And we'll make sure that these slides are available so you don't have to try and read the little words. But we did some in-depth work looking at some reforming colleges, some pre-post work on how do you get to that transformative change I described. We're working with a larger cohort now. We're also looking at impacts, and we're doing a randomized control trial at 3 schools to actually try and get it, does this idealized model of advising lead to improved outcomes, like putting aside all the other changes that are happening, which is very exciting. We think about this a lot. That's basically the point. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've learned and then open it up for questions and pushback. So the first thing we've learned in all of this work, and I should say that most of the work that we've done, there is an element of using technology to promote these changes, which we can dig into some of the questions later on, is around college culture. And this is one of those frustrating findings where basically the colleges that had figured out how to get to a culture of putting students and student success at the center and making it everyone's responsibility had a better shot at actually improving student advising. It's frustrating because, it's hard to change a culture. But I think it's important to understand that before people launch into a full-bore redesign of student services, it's often useful to think about cultural change. How do you have those conversations with others on your campus to get to a place where decision-making, budgeting, practices throughout the college are really focused on holistic student support? Whether that's engaging a dean or a provost to start making that case with you. But having that culture where people have started to understand that this is critical for everybody's success is a really important first step to seeing success around just redesigning those processes and structures I talked about. The second thing that we've seen is this notion of urgency and vision. So places that manage to pull off transformation have a sense of urgency around the work. Sometimes that's driven by things like performance-based funding. Sometimes it's driven by things like frustration with stagnation. So this was a great one. A lot of times, folks in the community just realize it's time to do something different. So this was actually in Achieving the Dream College, and I don't know how many of you are Achieving the Dream schools, but this happened to be an Achieving the Dream school, and Achieving the Dream is very focused on using data to move metrics, essentially. This was a school that had been involved in Achieving the Dream for close to a decade, and basically, they had been doing all this work and feeling like they were running as fast as they can, and then they looked at the data, and it wasn't going where they needed to go. And so this was a great quote. He said, we're doing all this muscle. It's supposed to be something return on investment. And I think we've gone up 2 points. And so this school, when they started to realize that, they were like, oh, I could use some swear words at this point. And then they were like, we've got to try something different, so let's blow it up. And they did. And it was hard, but they were seeing some interesting early results. That sense of urgency. So how do you create that sense of urgency is a critical first step towards any big reform. The second piece of that, though, is this vision, okay? And this one, actually, I probably should make its own slide because I think it's really important. So one of the things we see in these reforms is people get really urgent. We need to make a change. We need to do better advising. Well, I don't actually know what that means. And so a lot of people come up with these visions of their reform that are like, all students will feel loved and protected. All right. Well, now I'm an advisor who's coming to work. Like, what do I do with that, right? Like, I don't know what to do with that. The schools, and this is where your work this afternoon, I think about how do you bring this back to your campus. This is the kind of work that you can do that is really impactful. The schools that have success in this kind of reform, and again, I would argue that if it's not advising, but it's some other piece of guided pathways, the same lesson applies, are really clear in their vision. Students will have a different advising experience because they will have an assigned advisor who meets with them, uses a technology tool to check on their progress, and asks questions about blah, 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 whatever. I don't care what the vision is, but it's actionable. It's not just students will have a magical experience because the unicorn's going to come in and fix it. It's you as a person are going to come to work every day and do your job differently. Now, the immediate reaction is like, well, but then they might not like the vision. And my answer to that is yes, some of them might fight about the vision. But if you give a vague vision, they will be scared. This is what we saw in a lot of our schools. They will be a little nervous about it, and they'll push back, and they won't have anything to guide their behavior, so they'll keep doing what they've always done. In a concrete, actionable vision, they may still not like it. But at least they know what to do when they come to work every day. Often you can then start doing things like trying to hold people accountable for it. They can try it. And in more instances than not, they may realize that the trying it wasn't so bad and it's livable. Because there's something to react to. So this school is a great example where they actually did a whole process mapping exercise and spent about a year planning for their reform. And they really sat down and said, this is what we're going to have people do with our new technology tools, with our new advising system. The way they will sit down with the advisor, they won't have to start from scratch. They can open it, meaning this technology tool, up and go, okay, yeah, it looks like you're taking this class. Why? You may not like that, but at least you know what's expected of you. And what was so interesting was this was a school that we visited about 6 months into their reform, and then we went back about a year and a half later. And we're still working with them. And it was fascinating because there were a lot of cranky people about the vision. And we have quite a few interviews where people who were cranky in that first visit, said, I tried it, and I actually really like it. It's changed how I do my job for the better. There are a couple who still now, 3 years later, still are cranky because there will always be cranky people. But when you have a clear and actionable vision, you're giving people something to react to. So our first inclination in reform is to set this high-level vision because it feels good and doesn't sound as scary. But our research shows that actually that's counterproductive. That the more actionable you are, the better you can guide behavior change, and the more likely you are to get those changes to happen. This is a really important point because a lot of you are probably hearing that technology is going to fix your advising problems. It's the easy button, right? If you buy a certain product, you'll program plan, you'll have early alerts, life is going to be awesome. I've come around. I joke I'm a Luddite who runs a tech project. I have come around to the necessity of having some tech tools when we talk about redesign, because given the 7-hour waits, I mean, we need some help. Technology is an enabler, not the solution, okay? It is the tool that lets you do SIP. It, in and of itself, is not gonna support students, okay? So do not fall prey to the siren song of some of my friends in various tech places. You can do beautiful things with this, or it can live on the internet and life will go on as always. And the question is, how do you create a vision and get people to do their jobs differently with this architecture? Okay, and that is a critical lesson. Our first round of research was in many ways testing a fight I was having with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where they really thought that the tech was going to be the magical unicorn, and I was like, my sociological brain like exploded. And to their credit, we did convince them with data that no, this is not the whole story. You need to talk about how people use the technology, how you advise in that context, how you restructure. But I'm not sure that everyone, that's just a harder thing. So people still are trying to make tech the answer when it's just the architecture. That said, if you pick your technology and think about it, there are ways to leverage technology tools, whether it's Civitas or EAB or whatever the state of New Jersey currently loves, although you guys are decentralized, so you may get to pick your own. Anyway, you can, with technology, start doing some SIP, right? You can assign advisors now because you have this platform, right? You can have procedures for sharing case notes. I mean, my favorite example of why technology might be good was we were at a school at the beginning of one of our studies where people were taking case notes, but they were individual, they were on paper, and then someone went on maternity leave. And the file got locked. And there were no case notes on any of those students because they were in a locked file cabinet. So technology can create new procedures around how do you take case notes. A lot of them even have things like quick notes, so you can just standardize what those case notes are and share them more easily, even sometimes with faculty or different offices. So you can start getting that information sharing across those different offices. More importantly, it gets you to procedural change. It lets you do advising as teaching. Because if you think about it, before you had a student, you may not have ever met them before. You get 15 minutes with them, and the first 8 are like, who are you? What's your major? What courses are you taking? Blah, blah, blah. If you have case notes, you don't have to do that. If you have their picture, you don't have to do that. What you can do, if you have guided pathways and program plans, and you can see what courses they said they're going to take, you can start doing things like, you say you want to be in STEM, but you're not taking any math. Let's talk about that. So you may still only have 15 minutes, but that whole set of procedures around what you do with those 15 minutes can change. What we're finding is that that is actually really hard. We're spending a lot of time thinking about how do you write guiding questions, how do you create toolboxes to make sure that advisors and counselors actually can leverage the information on this platform in ways that make sense. But if you're attentive to it, you change the whole tenor of the conversation. Finally, you can start shifting those norms about what it means to advise. Shifting from advising is registration to advising is asking questions, guiding questions with a toolbox. Who advises? Now we can share information, so if you have a faculty advisor who's talking about internships and a professional advisor who's talking about academic planning, transfer, you can start talking together. Crazy thought. So the technology is a really useful architecture, but please don't think it's the solution, I beg of you. Finally, and I alluded to this, the process change is the hardest part. So when we went into this work 5 or 6 years ago, I really thought the hardest part was going to be the restructuring, the how do we get from long lines, unassigned advisors, to something that gets us to case management with regular touch points. and that's hard. I was surprised, and I continue to be surprised, about the extent to which I thought that once we got those structures in place, the good advising, that good interaction would just happen, because I have deep faith and love for people who do this work. And I thought, well, once I give you the time, like, you're going to be psyched. And people are excited. But I think, as I said, there are many folks out in the field who have had good practice socialized out of them, or felt like they were signing up to be academic advisors and didn't realize that in this new paradigm, academic advising intersects with counseling, intersects with career advising, so don't feel fully prepared to do this more integrated approach. And so this process change of getting people to fundamentally change how they do their jobs every day has been a really heavy lift. And it's something that we're starting to think about a lot more. How do we take the leaders in this field and make others comfortable with that, right? So if you've been an advisor for 30 years and all of a sudden you're supposed to be talking about homelessness and that never happened before, you can imagine that that feels way out of your skill set. So we're starting to think about how do we help colleges come up with guiding questions so that we can build metacognitive skills in those advising sessions. How do you create, as I said, toolboxes? How do you come up, we don't want to go with scripts because I'm not like a believer in that, but how do you get that right balance of giving enough guidance to help people understand how to use these new tools while still giving a lot of room for professional judgment and personalization. So that's sort of where our research is currently focused, in addition to looking at impacts. But I think it's important to surface the fact that the evidence so far is that as you do this work, you're going to have to be just as attentive to what happens in that one-on-one advising session as you are to changing the structures that get you there. That was really surprising to me. And I think it's just that the siloing, the structures have actually influenced people's practice in deeper ways. And things like hiring. We hire you for your career expertise or your academic advising expertise, but now we're asking you to do both. You know, we certify academic and career advisors differently. So there's some real questions around what happens in those advising sessions, and I always come back to that's what the students are telling us they need, so it's incumbent upon us to figure out how to make it work. But this is hard. Don't underestimate the getting people to change their behaviors piece of the puzzle. So, and I do want to end by pointing out that right now, I feel like we're in an experimentation phase. So to the point of you will not have answers. I don't have answers. I have a lot of examples of really interesting things that are happening. I think we have a pretty strong evidence base of A, what didn't work, and B, what should work if we can figure out how to make it happen. The how to make it happen is the part that we're figuring out, right? So there's no one right way to do this, and unfortunately, there are no impact analyses yet because this work is so new. I can't say to you, I know that this approach worked, because most places are just starting to deploy these approaches, therefore I can't test them yet. But I will just quickly run through 3 really interesting approaches to making SIP real in a pathways environment so you can sort of hear and get your wheels turning, and then we'll turn it over to questions. Montco outside of Philadelphia, so not that far from here. We've worked with them for 6-7 years at this point. And they are actually in our randomized control trial. So we will be testing and have impacts, full causal impacts in a couple years. They redesigned all of their advising. They actually did a year-long process mapping before they did the redesign. So they actually sat down and said, what do students need to do to get from application to completion? What is working, what is not? And how are we going to fix all of those pain points before they ever picked a technology or picked a structure, which I thought was really smart. It's like start going slow to go fast. They landed on a place where they have taken their professional advisors and attached them to departments so that there is some degree of sort of content specialization and point person. And then they have a program planning tool, an early alert tool, and then they have what they call a Blackboard shell. So students with their assigned advisors are assigned almost to a course in Blackboard, and they can use that to communicate with students and provide resources and do some of the teaching outside of a one-on-one advising session. They also have a toolbox that guides advising sessions, so advisors know what to do with all of this information when the students come in, and they have specific moments where students are supposed to meet with their advisors. If anyone is going to AACC in April, I think they will be presenting with us. Maybe I should take that back. No, I'm pretty sure they'll be there. And we actually will come out with a summary of what they're doing this summer. So that one's pretty interesting because it's not officially guided pathways, but they did attach their professional advisors to courses and programs. One of the things we often hear is that generalist advisors, it's just really hard to advise for all of the possibilities. But at the same time, you don't want, you want to make sure that students have access to faculty, that they have access to the general kinds of knowledge that advisors have. So this is an interesting approach. A second approach, which is similar but much more explicit around guided pathways, is from Monroe Community College, which is in upstate New York in Rochester. They are a guided pathways school. They're in the AACC Guided Pathways Initiative. So they have already redesigned into what they call schools, but those are essentially meta majors. They have a hybrid model. So one question I often get is, what about faculty advisors versus professional advisors? They did not want to get rid of their faculty advising, but recognize that some faculty are better at it and like it more than others. So they have attached professional advisors to each of their schools. They call them, I can't remember what they call them. They call them something else. But they've attached them, so if I'm in the school of whatever, that advisor is responsible for me and reaches out and is proactive. But they have faculty members in each school who are considered liaisons, who essentially take on the faculty advising role. So if there is a question about an internship or career development, that professional advisor in that school can send the student to that faculty member who actually wants to advise. And so you sort of have this, again, this hybrid model of threading the needle between professional advising and career-focused advising, and that's explicitly in a pathways model, and they do have program planning software as well. Finally, City Colleges of Chicago was a leader in guided pathways. They took a little bit of a different approach. They still have multiple professional advisors, or at least did the last time we did field work there about a year ago, where they have intake-focused advisors, they have an assigned advisor, and then they have what they call completion advisors. So once students get to a certain credit market, they get shifted over to a different advisor whose job is basically to kick their butts until they finish. I will tell you, it's interesting because it certainly has helped with their completion rates. They do have a lot of self-advising still because they have some robust technology tools. The students have what they call the donut that can show them how far they are towards completion, and they love the donut because it tells them what they need to take. I will say that that model, the students don't love it. They think it's a little confusing, but it's worth putting out there because it has had its intended effect on completion rates. But the students are sort of like, I don't know who my advisor is. And by the way, I got to know this advisor, and now I'm close to graduation and need a new one. So, again, trade-offs. But because this is all experimentation, I don't want to point out just the rosy ones. They are also the ones who are probably most heavily reliant still on self-advising. And again, they're seeing really good results. So I could be wrong. Maybe we don't need advisors, but I don't really think I'm wrong. So those are just some ideas. Again, can't give you impacts. Just want to start getting you thinking about how you can change your own model. So the reason we had you start thinking about your own model was to relate it back to some of these ideas and theories. I will stop there, and we have, I think I did it right. We have close to a half hour for questions and pushback and anything else. So I'm happy to do that, and then remember that I have to make this happy once in a while. Okay, so who wants to yell at me first? Or ask questions. You don't have to yell. Yeah. Do we need to walk the mic? Do I need to play Oprah? Do we have a second mic? All right. That's okay. Well, they're videotaping. Just be warned, they're videotaping this.
So I'm just wondering, what is the student to counseling, advising staff ratio in the schools that you have been researching? That would help a lot. Where we are, we have about 14,000 students, and we just reduced our counseling and advising staff, I guess I should even say decimated it. So we'd like to, know more about that.
It varies immensely. So we are working with a cohort of 26 schools, actually, and it varies a lot. I don't know MCC. Chicago's is pretty high still. Montco, who I just know the most about, I think they said they were at about 1 to 450. So we're not talking about going crazy low, right? I mean, we're still talking about relatively large, especially if you want to meet with every student. Now, one of the things, and I didn't go into it because, trying to be parsimonious, but one of the things that we see a lot, particularly with the technology-mediated advising, is that you can start to stagger who you meet with, right? So you may need to meet with all of your first semester students, maybe more than once. But if you do advising as teaching, the theory is that you don't need to meet with all of them. The other thing that we're seeing is we're working with the Fresno State out in California. They're a 4-year. Their advising loads are quite large. They're doing things like using peer mentors. So when I say experimentation, like we're really talking about experimentation. So they get early alerts. They want to act on all of the alerts, but they can't because their ratios are crazy. Perhaps not as big as yours, but big. So they hired and trained peer mentors. And the peer mentors are the ones who do the first follow-up. That's just like, hey, I see you got an alert. Have you followed up? The peer mentors have been trained so that if something comes up in that phone call that's worthy of elevation to a professional, something comes up about homelessness, mental health, they know what to do. But you don't need a professional advisor to check in on the first necessarily the first bad grade or the first missing assignment. So people are starting to play around with things like peer mentors, things like telephone calls. We have in our heads that every advising touch needs to be an in-person advising meeting. And I love an in-person advising meeting because that's how you make friends, right? But a telephone call might work. Skype might work. Sometimes email works. I think now we like to email and text an awful lot. And there's a question about diminishing returns. But thinking creatively about what it means to have sustained contact with a student is another exploration frontier. So the ratios are lower, but not low. And the reason colleges are think they can pull this off is because they're redefining a little bit what it means to touch a student. The other thing is that you can start to do things like your third semester students. If they're just going along, they just may need a quick email of like, hey, it's registration time, you're good. You don't need to, that's the personalization piece of it. You don't need to give every student the same intervention at the same time. Because we've been resource constrained, we've sort of set up this system where we treat everyone with the same blunt instrument, right? First semester students get this meeting, second semester students get that meeting, and because we don't know who needs what, we just do it that way. But actually, that's probably not right. Some first semester students may not need our help, but our third semester, fourth semester students may because something came up in their lives that they do. With these technology tools and with assigned advisors who know students and can start figuring out these red flags, you can start, I use the word triage with somewhat reluctance, but essentially triaging. And that starts to help mitigate these high caseloads. Now, I will be honest with you and say that most places that do this advising reform or do guided pathways start to try and hire more advisors, which makes me happy, because they very quickly realize that they're like a good thing and good for their completion rates and they need them, but you don't have to. There are ways to play with this. So, yeah. Yes.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the balance between, because my experience has been that students definitely do want an advisor, like they want a name, they want the connection, but I think at the community college they also want advising right now because I'm here and I have a babysitter and I gotta go, so I need to, so do you have any thoughts on balancing those kind of conflicting demands?
So some of this, it's a problem in the community college all the time, right? This is what we deal with. We know online courses aren't necessarily the best delivery method for dev ed students, but we know they need to do the coursework at 10 at night. So what do we do with that? I do think that our reluctance to make things mandatory or to assign advisors or to require students to come with a schedule probably is ultimately not good for anybody, although I get the inclination. I think once you start moving towards, you can get that answer now via email, not in person. You might start to thread that needle. The other thing that we found in our work, we did a lot of work with students about their feelings about the technology, is that students love to do transactional stuff on their own when they want it. They also actually are more open to the affective part of advising via technology than I expected. I thought they would want like a physical warm hug. They're pretty good with like a virtual warm hug. I was surprised. But when it comes to big decisions, they need a person and they want a human being. So one thing I'm imagining is you can sort of indulge their desire to do it now on those first two pieces of the advising work. But to say to a student, if you really have a struggle and you need to talk to someone, you're gonna have to either pick up the phone or come in because we know that this is necessary. I think that is one way to guide it, is to know that this is actually where students want a person anyway. I do think that there are times, and we're testing this right now. Some of our colleges are having mandatory holds, and we're kind of curious to see what happens if students will comply. But I actually think we underestimate students when we say, oh, well, we know, you don't ever have to do anything. Like, that may not be serving them well either. So that's how I would bucket it, is to think about what things do they want and appreciate and use effectively, virtually and quickly, and when do you just need to say, no, this is how it has to be because that's how we want to help you. Let me get all my, oh, we do have another one. Okay, good. Oh, there, okay, then there, sorry.
Hi. Is it on?
Oh,
Okay.
and I need to do this.
Can you just speak to whether or not any of the schools that are in your cohort of trial schools are doing any of this work through their student success courses?
Yes, and I'm a huge fan of a student success course. Big fan, studied those for a long time. We have some really compelling evidence, actually also on how to redesign them. Because they're good, but some are better than others, and there are ways to do it more effectively. There are, not in our trial. The 3 in the trial are not doing this work. Maybe Monco kind of, but not really, through the student success course, but other schools are certainly doing a lot of this initial planning. And this is where the guided pathways and the advising really intersect, right? So if you have a mandatory student success course that requires students to set up that long-term plan that gets them to graduation, and you put it on a technology tool, right? Then you've completely taken that burden off of the first year, or that first semester registration, and your advisors, even in their 10 minutes, can have actual conversations about, oh, you moved that math course or that whatever course. We got to talk about that. So there are places that are leveraging their student success courses. We know a lot of the schools in the AACC Pathways Institutes are redesigning their student success courses to better align with the Pathways model. We're seeing a lot more focus on actually dual enrollment and student success courses. So I think it's Broward down in Florida. It's either Broward or St. Pete, so don't write down Broward because I could be wrong, but I think it's Broward. They redesigned their student success course around program planning for their pathways and then are pushing that down into the high school. It's a lot of also exploration of which pathway you should choose under the assumption, and we just are starting a study with them as well, the assumption being that if the high school students come to the college having already picked their meta major, that will take some of the burden off of advisors during that initial intake period. Obviously the jury's still out. So there is a lot of that. I would love to see, I think there's a lot of potential also in when you talk about assigning advisors, having students be assigned to their student success course advisor. So again, if you're talking about building that relationship and teaching those metacognitive skills, there's a lot of potential there. Logistically, I would imagine that in some schools that would be hard, but you can see how that would all fit together. So certainly student success courses are becoming more tightly coupled with this in a way that probably makes a lot of sense. There was here 1, 2, maybe? 1, 2, 1, 2. I just don't want to forget. Yeah.
Hi. Just a simple question. What do you think about students who, do you think student needs to take success courses mandatory, all of them, or not all of them?
I'm inclined to go with all of them. because of the impact, and the immediate answer is, but what about the mom who's already managing her time or whatever? We were just joking, I called the special snowflakes. There are always special snowflakes, right? Kay McClenny, who ran the SESI for many, many years, said that students don't do optional. She's not wrong. And I think student success courses have enough of an impact that where we know that they work, that why would we make them optional? Now, you could figure out a way to exempt certain students. You could also, and I think this goes back to some of the questions around, connecting them to pathways, find ways to target them. So I absolutely understand the complaint of the 35-year-old mother of 2 who's like, I don't need to learn how to boil water. Like, I'm good with the time management, So you can imagine sort of coming up with flavors of the success courses targeted at subpopulations. We see this, actually, we're doing a small project looking at supporting veteran students. And how do we connect veterans offices and veterans support to guided pathways and other reforms in the college. And one of the things a couple of schools in that cohort are doing is creating a student success course targeted specifically towards military-connected students, because you can imagine that the transition issues are slightly different for that population. So I think they should be mandatory, but to honor this very real concern that for some students they don't resonate, I think it makes sense to think about how do you target them or cohort them.
Melinda.
All right, your turn finally.
Yep. So my question relates to guided pathways and transfer. So I'm thinking to the transfer playbook that you all put out last year. One of the things we know is the majority of students come in wanting to transfer, they don't. What can you speak to a little bit guided pathways and transfer? So certainly I don't want to put the cart before the horse. I think we have to do advising well, and then we worry about transfer. But how do 2- and 4-year partnerships play into 4-year schools haven't necessarily, they have guided pathways in the sense of major maps, but how do they map onto what we are doing in guided pathways?
So full disclosure, that's not my portfolio, so I'm going to have to talk at a little bit of a high level, but I will connect you to Davis and John if you want to, because Davis could talk about it for like 3 days. I think this is, remember I said at the beginning, CCRC does iterative work. I think transfer is a great example of that. When we started thinking about the guided pathways model, and certainly we didn't only come up with it, but we wrote a book about it, we didn't really think about transfer. Just like we didn't really think about dual enrollment. We thought about redesigning the community college, and then you start to do this and you're like, oh man, our students, of course they want to transfer, and we are redesigning curricular pathways without really talking to 4 years. So this is a critical question, and I think it's the next frontier. My understanding is that what is happening in a lot of the leading schools is that they're working with their most common transfer partners to start figuring this out. So one of the, and this goes back to the special snowflake, right? So what do you do if 80% of your students transfer to 2 schools and you design your pathways to make sure they transfer those 2 schools, what do you do with the 20% that don't? We tend to not want to do anything because we don't want to hurt those 20%. But I think the strategy that many places are starting to take, and again, Davis can say more, is really to think, okay, most of my students are going to these schools. We're going to design transfer pathways and work hand in hand with those partners. And, I don't want to say it stinks to be you, but kind of like stinks to be you. I don't know if that's the best approach, but that's my understanding. I think right now we're at a moment where we absolutely understand that as we build out those guided pathways, we have to be attentive to transfer. I don't know that that's happening all over the place. I also know that there are now 4 years that are starting to replicate this around the country. And in fact, I believe it's the APLU that is going to be doing a cohort of guided pathway schools. So one would hope that eventually we'll get there. I don't know that we can make it any worse, because even without guided pathways, transfer was pretty not so systematic. But I think that it's a great example of us realizing that we need to do more work on this, because you're right. If students want to transfer, then we need to make sure that any pathway we set up gets them there. And that's actually something that we were seeing in Chicago, now that I think about it. The students loved that donut I mentioned. But often if they knew they wanted to transfer, they ignored it, because they would just call the transfer destination directly and plan off of that. So in some ways, when you look at our student transcripts from that project, and we interviewed 150 students, many of them were not actually really engaging in the reform because it didn't meet their perceived needs. And we're working on data analysis right now trying to understand what early major selection means, particularly for students who want to transfer. The fact that they had to pick a pathway, what did they do with that? Our initial hunch is that many of them picked something and then just called the destination school. So found a workaround. Stay tuned to see if that's actually true.
This is probably a really kind of specific question, but some of the schools that you've worked with, when their advisors are working with students in more of a virtual manual, how are they getting around the FERPA privacy issues?
It's a great question because it's come up. We've had some resistance. Now, I am definitely no FERPA expert, but our understanding is that it's not really FERPA because they're talking to a student. I mean, we had one school say, well, we don't know if it's the right student on the end of the phone, but you don't know that the right student got a letter either. So our sense is that many of these concerns about FERPA are overly cautious. Don't quote me, I'm not a lawyer. But why would you think that a student's gonna lie when you're emailing or if you're on their email? How is that any different than putting a text nudge out or an email? So we had one school that was a little worried about it initially, but I think overcame that. And obviously you would want to be careful. But to my understanding, it's actually not really a FERPA issue because you're not necessarily talking to anyone else on the phone. You're just assuming that you're talking to the right person, which, I mean, I don't know. It seems reasonable, no more unreasonable than sending a letter or sending a text. So there have been some concerns and it's definitely doable. Yeah.
How does the advising technology make it easier or harder to have some of the hardest questions? A student comes in saying they're going to be a computer science or engineering major, they're in remedial math, they have a 2.3 GPA, thinking they're going to get into one of the thousands of nursing students trying to get in. So does it make, because saying they're on a pathway, that's not,
right.
It could look like they're on the pathway, but they're really not.
So it's a great question, and it's one that this is a space that I think the field is ahead of the evidence base. I don't know that we know yet the best way to talk to students about some of these harder decisions. We're doing some work around like A/B message testing. I don't even think we know the right way to send an early alert, frankly. Is it better to... Well, I think there's honest, but there are different ways to be honest. The same data, right? So here's an example. I can tell you to this example of you can say it in a way that's totally cooling out, that's just you're never going to make it. You can say it in a writing red flag. You can say it in I really think you should change. You can say it in a way that's probably misleading. There are a lot of ways to take the same data point and message it. And we don't yet know what will work for part of it too is what will resonate with you and freak you out may actually be really effective with you. I don't know the answer.
As a professional counselor, my obligation is to be honest. There's only one way to be honest. And I can't tell a student what to decide. It's not my job to give advice. It's our job, as we all know, to say, here are your options. Based on my experience, I'm concerned if you pursue this path, it may be very difficult for you. If you want, we can talk about other options. Students have a right to fail if they choose to fail. Our job is to give options, not to do that if they choose not to do that.
Right. And I think that's the approach many people are taking. I think it gets a little more nuanced because suddenly you do have more data. And I think that's where some of I think that might be where you were going. The technology in some ways makes it harder because now you don't just know you're failing necessarily this course, but you have a lot more at your fingertips around case notes, potentially around predictive patterns, which I got to tell you scares the who's-y what's-y off me, because now we know that, okay, predictive, we predict you're going to fail. Well, prediction is not fate. So how do I say to you in a way that, again, what you're saying is absolutely accurate, but that doesn't mean that for some students, they won't hear different answers. And are we accidentally cooling out? Do we accidentally because we all have implicit biases, say it one way to certain subgroups of students and provide different alternatives to other groups of students. We have so much more information at our fingertips that we don't, I think you're right, don't know how to message it all the time. So for example, that donut I told you about. Our assumption, based off of behavioral economics and the assumption that we just want to be honest with students, is that a donut or some other way of mapping out how long it's going to take you to get to graduation is a good thing. Most students will say to us, I totally love it. I love knowing exactly what I need to do. I love the donut. But when we look at the data, there is a not insignificant subset of students who say, hey, I took a look at that donut and realized I was going to be here for forever, and all I want to do is give up. So I'm out. And yes, that's their choice to leave, but is there a way to message that that's a little bit more productive, right? And that's what I don't think we have a full handle on yet. We have assumed that early warning systems, red, yellow, green, are a good thing. Ah, red, you're in trouble. And our assumption is like, oh, students will like suddenly work way harder and get better because they know they're in trouble. Well, maybe they might just go running for the hills. You know, I have been wanting for a while to understand what happens to nursing students who don't make it into nursing programs. Because we assume that they're transferring to a different program, but actually many of them are probably just leaving. When if we gave them a different menu of options that said, you're probably not going to get into the nursing program, but here's phlebotomy, here's something else, here are these other alternatives where most of your credits will transfer, they may stick around. And we don't have the data on that, but my hunch is a lot of them aren't staying around. So yes, we should just be honest with them and give them choices. But now that you have more data, some of which is predictive, some of which is not, how you message those choices becomes a little bit harder and a little bit more complicated. And Mark Milliron from Civitas, which is one of the vendors, often says that once you have the data, you are ethically obligated to act on it, which is, I agree with him. Actually, he and I disagree on many things, but on that, I agree with him. The difference is, I worry that we don't know how to ethically act on it yet. We now have an obligation to act on more than just registration data without necessarily having the resources because we've slashed our support. So now now that I know you're homeless, I'm ethically obligated to help you with that. Well, what am I supposed to do with that, right? So it becomes a little bit more complicated. It's not that we shouldn't be honest. It's that honesty is a little bit different now that we have more data. It's all at our fingertips. There are questions around, back to FERPA, if we have these platforms, we're sharing data. We've had a lot of colleges really have some deep conversations about who should have what. We know we want to share across silos, but how do we manage that in a way that we are sharing and students feel like everyone they talk to knows who they are, but we aren't, violating FERPA or saying too much. It becomes, that level of honesty and giving options takes on a different flavor when you move to this system. I think they're good conversations, but they're really hard, and the data are not full. We don't know, is the donut the right way to go? I don't know. Is it giving them a list of options and assuming they can choose? Or is it sending them to a second student success course? I don't think we know that yet.
Thanks. Can you hear me? Is it on? Okay, great. I just want to say briefly that I had the good fortune one time of working at a college that I guess you could describe as being very much the kind of college that had some of the principles that you were talking about. The counselors were faculty. They were integrated with the departments. They taught an orientation class. They worked with the students to try to get to understand who are you when you came in here? Where do you want to go? Where do we want to end up? And then come up with a program plan to do that. And then that was modified during the first, second semesters. As the student took courses, we would meet with them again and try to make another assessment. Are your plans still the same? Do we need to modify them? And it worked very, very well. I don't think we call them guided pathways, but essentially that's what we were doing. And we had a student-faculty ratio of about 300 students to start with, because that was what the college was founded on. And then unfortunately, as time went on, budgetary constraints being what they were, I think we ended up at one point with a load of 800 students. And the things started to fall apart because it didn't have the financial support that it once had at the beginning. But I just wanted to say that anecdotally, I lived the life that you're kind of describing, and I think many of the things you say are wonderful. I've actually experienced them in my career.
Thank you. Yeah, it all sounds like you're describing that school. I'm like, that's Nirvana. I want to teach there. I think what's intriguing about the guided pathways part of this is if you do the guided pathways reform, and this is where I think when I said before there are two sides of the same coin, if you do the guided pathways and you really get to a place where you've got 10 or 12 meta majors and you've got actual sort of menus of options of program plans, and Judy Scott Clayton, who works with us, often calls them sort of the prefix version of this. So we're not saying students can only stick to those plans. They can do a la carte if they want, but you handed a student that you can get to a higher ratio. You can get to the SIP version you just described at a little bit of a bigger scale, because you don't have to do individualized program planning for every student. Once they've figured out, I want to be in such and such a meta major, you've already sort of loaded up their initial course, and then you're just mixing and matching for their individual situation. And that's where the two reforms, we hope, really work together really nicely. We often get questions about the ASAP program at CUNY, which is essentially intensive advising as you just described. It's one of the most impactful programs. It's been rigorously studied. Yes, it's more expensive, although it's cheaper. It's probably cheaper, about the same per graduate. But it's essentially just really intensive advising. But there's nothing that changes the structure of the college. And when we get asked about the difference, and I love ASAP, but when we get asked about the difference between the two, it's really hard to scale ASAP for the reasons you just described. When you get more students and less money, that degree of intensity is very hard to sustain. The hope is that with guided pathways, you can provide those structures at a bit more of a scale, because some of that administrative work of crafting a schedule, of figuring out exactly which courses to take when, has been relieved because you've created those streamlined pathways. And that's how we think they fit together. You can do the kind of advising I just described without guided pathways and without technology. We kind of do it in most of our really elite liberal arts schools, frankly. But given the constraints that we live in, it's a lot harder. And so the question for me is always, how do you go from pie in the sky Nirvana to we've got to go to work every day, and we've got budgets getting slashed, and we have really high advisor ratios. How do we do what's best for students in that context? And that's why the technology, the program maps seem like a good way to thread the needle and scale some of this. Jury's out. I'm the researcher. I always have to say we haven't tested it yet, but the evidence so far is promising. We have time, or are we at time? We're at time? We're at time. Well, thank you. This was fun as always, and I'm happy to answer additional questions here or email. That's me. So.
I want to introduce Kelly Slade from Cumberland County College. She'll be giving a brief presentation till about 1:30, talking about how they have redesigned the advising experience at Cumberland. I know many of you might have similar kinds of things happening at your institution, and I do want to also try to create a webinar. I know there's a couple of you that have come up to me and said that you'd like to share what you're doing at your college, so we can find some other platforms for that, but we do always like to share also an inside New Jersey kind of story, because we have a lot of great work happening here. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly so she can get started with her presentation. And please join me in welcoming Kelly to the
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be very brief, and hopefully I can explain it as best as I can. Just to give you kind of a background before we go into the Prezi, we at Cumberland have undergone several changes for the last year and a half, and the most recent is a new president in June of 16. And prior to that, between July of 15 and 16, we had an interim president, but we also had 32 people leave the college. Not a mass exodus. It was kind of like a gradual piece, whether they got new positions or they retired or resigned or what have you. It was a really a big time of change. So coupled with that, we had started the Guided Pathways work in December of 15, which was much earlier than many of the other New Jersey schools. And so we were kind of a leader school with that respect. But people on campus were very cautious, and they were very scared on many levels. So, of course, my colleague and I, the Director of Advisement, we went to a NACADA Institute this past summer, the end of July. Phenomenal, phenomenal experience. If any of you ever can connect with NACADA, which is the National Association for Academic Advising, it is by far the best money well spent. The Institute is different than a conference because you're actually in working sessions, so you're learning at the conference level from experts, and then you're actually working in small groups with your college and others similar to your college to actually implement and kind of design. And so that's what brought us to our new approach, advising is teaching. So our college was changing very rapidly. We also, in the midst of redesigning a new model, we also instituted Starfish, and so that was a big, huge undertaking. And again, it's not a panacea. I will talk about it in a little bit. And we also had to scale up our campus engagement. Many people changed positions, and we just weren't where we wanted to be. So the Guided Pathways work was really an approach that brought us together in a cross-directional way. We have 4 Guided Pathways committees that really worked very hard in the various implementations. Most specifically, our Advisement and Student Success Guided Pathways team worked on the new model. We have a technology team. They actually did the Starfish implementation, among other things, Ellucian Go, and our student ed planning software. We have the academic mapping and planning team that is really working on our mapping and how to link that to career piece. And they're working in conjunction with our careers and goals team that's helping to redesign the student success courses and really infusing career pieces within the freshman advising piece. You all are familiar with Guided Pathways. I won't belabor that. So we had to really talk to our campus about what was advisement, because some of our folks, believe it or not, really still thought, man, it's just course selection. 2 times, 3 times a year, wham, bam, you're done. Well, that's not really what it is. We know that, right? But some folks were really in that bandwagon, and they thought, man, it's only really for registration. What else can we do? We have such big caseloads. The other folks on the other side of the fence were, well, you know, how much hand-holding do you really want to do? You know, how do you measure that? What's good, what's bad? If they're old enough to go to college, they're old enough to do it on their own. Well, yeah, as you know, guess what? Our population at Cumberland is pretty at risk. We have over 75% first generation. And I'll tell you what, the hand-holding works. And I'm not talking hand-holding ad nauseum, but I'm talking hand-holding so that we can hopefully get them from a scared-to-death 17, 18-year-old to a very high-functioning transfer student, right? And then the other train of thought was, man, if they can't figure it out, do they really belong here? That's where we were. So today, we're more deliberate. We're much more purposeful and structured. We have a proactive approach. And I have to tell you, implementing Starfish in September, along with this new advisement model, really opened our eyes to what could be, and really is helping us with case management, tracking and monitoring. And the most important piece is having our trifecta communication system, that's what we call it, between student, faculty member, and advisor. It is really and truly eye-opening. The data you receive is pretty interesting as well. And we started in small steps. In terms of our September launch, we wanted everybody to create a profile. Every single person on campus, whether you're a faculty member, an advisor, or a student. Did we get 100%? Not really. We got about 82. Pretty good. However, we're still working it out. But I can tell you, if you don't have some kind of early alert system, and that would be your tool, as Melinda mentioned, you need to invest in one. And remember, if you don't invest, what's the ROI going to be, right? The interventions and touch points that we have, there's a minimum of 4. Okay, 4 touch points if you're an under 30 college credit student. However, if you're in a specialized cohort, and we have multiple, we have 13 specialized cohorts, okay, there's multiple measures in addition to the 4 that are standard per the grant or the funding source. It's also strength-based advisement, and you might say, well, what the heck is that? Well, let me share with you. So Lori Schreiner really talks about a paradigm shift for higher education. It used to be failure prevention, again, that reactionary approach and a survival mentality. Well, now it's success, and we promote a perspective of thriving, right? We're proactive. So we believe advising is teaching. I know you've heard that so many times today, but you also wear many other hats. You're a coach, you're a mentor, and you're a counselor. Sometimes you're their surrogate mother and father. Last year I had a student come to me, and his father had a duffel bag with him, and I said, oh, sir, you want to put that down? Oh, no, this is for my student. You're going to be the new mom, and we're leaving. We're going back to New York. And I thought, oh, all right. Okay, let's figure that out. He was a minor. That's a whole other set of issues or challenges, right? But you're going to be his mom, and I have all the faith in the world in you. I heard you're really good, so here he is. And by the way, he wants to play basketball. All right, okay. So we wear many hats. And really, if you think about it, as Wes Habley says, academic advising is the only structured activity on campus in which students have the opportunity for ongoing one-on-one conversations and interactions with somebody who's concerned. Right? Do you agree? But again, we have to make sure it's consistent, right? And we have to make sure it's not only intrusive, but intensive support. So again, from Coring, what does advising teach? Well, decision-making, critical thinking, curriculum, academic regulations, but they're interactive, and it results in student learning. So why do we feel that a new approach is needed? Well, it's more cost-effective to retain than to recruit a student. We all know that. And look at the reason why. We have empty chairs in the classroom. That's a big deal. Empty chairs equal what? Loss of revenue, right? And at the end of the day, guess what? Revenue is important. So again, how do you retain versus recruit? With a new advisement model. We have an under 30 and a 30 and over model, again with specialized cohorts. So our under 30 college credits basically are serviced and advised by our student services personnel who act as generalists. Okay, because as you know, sometimes those students need social services. Sometimes they're homeless, sometimes they're not getting food on the table, sometimes they have transportation issues, daycare issues. You've all heard it, correct? Then once they reach that 30 college credit completion mark, we then go over to a faculty mentor and expert situation, and they work on things like transfer assistance and really dive into what they want to do in their career. Okay? Now, understand you have to have a formalized professional development program, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Our specialized cohorts like EOF, SSS, athletics, Las Vias, HSI STEM, athletics, veterans, international, ESL, among others, they have more of the multiple touch points, and they have more of a formalized structure depending upon their grant specifics. And they also need to attend seminars throughout the semester. But again, the most important common denominator is intrusive advisement, intensive support, proactive. So how do you shift your culture, right? And remember, mine was like a roller coaster. But we thought, well, you know what, with all the changes, what's one more? We have to embrace it in some way, shape, or form, right? So we thought, well, let's figure out what is really the advisement mission. And P.S., if you have syllabi for classes, let's create an advisement syllabus. And you know what your role is as an advisor. You know what your role is as a student. Okay? And maybe what we can do is kind of give them that formalized, substantive piece of paper that kind of tells them what to do when. And most importantly, let's think about the professional development. How are we going to change that culture? How are we going to provide that sense of urgency needed every semester, okay, for people to get their professional development training? Because things are changing, right? They're rapidly changing. We have face-to-face and we have online modules through Blackboard, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. We also have to think about our continuous assessment cycle and continuous improvement plan, because at the end of the day, it all has to link back to strategic planning, right? And that continuous cycle is extremely important. So what are the student learning outcomes for the advisor and the advisee? Well, our GP team for advisement and student success talked about, well, we really want to empower our students. And how are we going to empower our students? Well, we have to teach them first. And through their student ed planning, guess what? We empower them to lead themselves with our intensive intrusive support. We definitely want to guide and support them through their guided pathways. Whether they come in as a meta major student, we call it career pathways, or if they really know I'm going to be a psych major, I want to go to get my master's, and I want to be a psychologist. We have some of those students. We want to make sure that the pathways are so structured, okay, and we want to make sure that we are very deliberate. We use Career Coach by MC. We're very deliberate in looking at what career paths you have, what options do you have, especially looking at our own personal gap analysis. It looked over 4 counties. We did it last year. And the gap analysis is important because you want to know what's in supply and what's in demand. Right? If you have an academic program that only has 4 students left, well, you have to weigh that out. Are we keeping that? What are we doing with it? And P.S., what about those students, those 4 students? How do we transition them? What's important? And then we want to make sure that we always provide the most accurate, up-to-date information. That's why our training is so important. Whether it be policies, whether it be services, resources from the college and the county. And then we want to evaluate and monitor academic progress. Very, very important. We also thought, okay, well, what will our syllabus entail? And basically, it's in the development stages now. We're almost done with the whole thing. It basically frames the advising relationship, and it clarifies mutual expectations. It's very, very important. Very important. It also optimizes and maximizes a student's educational experience, as well as the advisor, right? If you're going into something, like for example, we have workforce students that have been displaced from their positions, right? They're coming in as a 55-year-old gal or guy. They have no clue what to expect if they're going to try and become a college student. Clear expectations are very important. So really and truly, this GP team has really dived into this new model, but have really thought about, okay, globally, what do we need to do? And it's a cross-functional team. It has faculty members, administration, IT. You'll see it at the end. So our training. They developed training modules for both under 30 and over 30, the priorities for each model, hierarchies for each model in terms of academic advisement, and then we had to solicit our help from the Student Services Division, as well as our faculty, because at the end of the day, one person can't manage over 35 modules, right? So for example, one module deals with financial aid. Well, who better than to manage and advise us is the financial aid director. As you know, those rules and regs change very rapidly. So what we do is each semester, they are to put their information in the module on Blackboard, and they manage it as they want to update it. So if the updates come every spring, they put them in every spring. If it's every fall and spring, they come in and put them in every fall and spring. Athletics has a piece in there because if you are an athletic academic advisor, eligibility is a huge piece of the pie, right? I know I advise our softball team. I know I cannot put a softball player in a 7-week course if it's the last 7 weeks of the semester. Why? Their season begins in January. The course doesn't begin until March. They're ineligible, right? Just nuances like that. Well, what better way than to put it online on Blackboard at anybody's fingertips? They can click on athletics, they can click on eligibility. It's all right there. Same thing with dual credit, dual enrollment, international, and the list goes on. We actually have 4 modules right now with built-in assessment per module. And what I'll do is I'll give you our Blackboard link, and maybe you can kind of play around and see what we have on there. But basically, NACADA really helped us this summer figure out, particularly Fox Technical Community College, really helped us figure out the best way to provide professional development training. I don't know about your campus, but there was every excuse in the book. Oh, I can't come to an hour-and-a-half training. Oh, I'm busy. I have car trouble. Well, guess what? If you have them face-to-face and you have them online, they're right at your fingertips. So that's how we did it. You want to make sure it's not an us versus them. So you want to definitely develop consensus and collective expectations. And it's always about student learning, and it's always about advising as teaching for us. So you want to use evidence to understand our outcomes and to see what's appropriate. And you want to make sure they support the improvements in advisement, right? And they're making sure that anything that you do with a student is deliberate and it contributes to their learning, right? Advising is teaching. Looking at assessment, which could be a dirty word for some. Others embrace it. I know our campus took a little bit to embrace it. People, I think, were fearful a little bit. But at the end of the day, you have to make sure when you identify your outcomes, people are involved. You must get buy-in. When you gather your evidence and you interpret it, make sure you work very closely with your IR office and your assessment office, right? We can't have dirty data, right? And then you want to make sure that when you implement the change, there's a change plan in place, right? And there's a transition plan in place, because change management can either be your best friend or your worst nightmare, right? So we really thought, as a result of academic advisement, what do we want our students to do, know, value, and appreciate? That was the crux of our sessions sometimes. Because at the end of the day, it's different for everybody, right? But if we can have a consistent outline or a consistent syllabus that denotes what we want, we can then get them there. So again, think about your advisement, student learning outcomes. What do you want your students to do? What do you want them to know? And what do you want them to value and appreciate? So we've talked about planning, doing, checking, and acting, right? And we want to make sure we actively engage our students. And the way we did that was we rolled out Starfish in the fall. Everybody was required to make a profile, and everyone was required to use Starfish. So we came up with a little slogan, #LearnToUse it. And that really engages all parties, students, faculty, and advisors. And the thing I love about Starfish is it's not always negative. It's not always an early alert, a red flag saying they're doing poorly, or we can't contact you, or you missed assignments, or there's an attendance concern. There's also kudos, and you can say to a student, man, keep up the good work. Outstanding academic performance, keep it up. You know, you're improving. Let's talk about how to do even more improvements. There's also referrals for tutoring and testing, as well as the writing labs, which is really important. So it puts them right into our center. And there's to-do messages, which I absolutely love. And with my cohort, I give them a to-do before career day, before transfer day, before advisement day. So it just kind of, again, is it hand-holding? Some might think so, but I think it's really great because I alert them a week before they have to make an appointment, which is a week before advisement day. So it's really 2 weeks before. Hey, guess what? It's that time again. Don't forget, email me with the time. We can also do a batch email through Starfish. So for example, all of our students who fill out a graduation petition were invited to transfer day. You have to have X amount of credits, a certain GPA, and there's on-site admissions at our transfer day. Okay, all 198 students that attended transfer day, first of all, got acceptances. Thank goodness, that was a good thing. But they also have Starfish to-dos in their file saying, hey, don't forget, this is the packet you have to fill out, here's your time frame, this is where you have to report, and by the way, this is how you dress for the day. That's specific. So we like the to-dos. The checking piece is really important. Like I said, certain cohorts have multiple touch points, more so than the 4 mandatory ones that the rest of the college has. And that's basically 25% in, which is your initial progress reports, midterms 50% in, 75% in, which is, listen, semester's almost done, here's some red flags. We have to either talk about dropping you or talk about what you're doing in the summer to make up those credits. Or let's think about, is there a plan? Okay, can you realistically pass this class? And ACT, again, how are you measuring student success? What's your continual improvement plan, and how does it link back to your strategic plan? It's really important. I just wanted to show you our committee, just so you can see it's really a cross-functional team from administrators to coordinators, divisional SDAs. And our SDAs are student development advisors. You get 1 per academic division. And they're basically, their cohorts are probably the largest because they actually take over for faculty in the summer and winter months when faculty might not be teaching. And they're also the liaison between the deans and the faculty and the student. We have counselors, directors, assistant directors. So our team is definitely very diverse, cross-functional, And again, it's through our GP initiative. And obviously, at the end of it, we want people to complete, right? So we feel that this change has really helped our campus move the needle upward and really has helped our retention rates go up. I can tell you, just between mid-December to end of January, we went from 51% to 77%, and we believe that was because of Starfish. We're still trying to kind of vet that out. Now, 77% is not anything to write home about, but what I'm saying is between 51 and 77% is a big deal. And people are now feeling more comfortable using it. We just rolled out a pilot of 18 faculty members for the progress surveys, which is a way for you to put grades in for initial progress, midterms, that's 75%. Obviously, final grades can't be in Starfish. They have to be in Colleague or whatever system you use, but we're going to roll out progress surveys, mandatory all campus in September. But again, we rolled out profile only. We did pilot for progress surveys. And I think we're getting there. We don't have 100% support from faculty yet, and that's our hardest nut to crack. And I think it's because of fear. We know they're content experts, and we know that they can really make an impact. And what we've been doing is going to their division meetings and training them there. We're going to them. And that's really worked very well for Starfish and for the new model. Any questions? Yes.
When you have faculty, when different kinds of listen to Starfish for students, does the faculty follow up? Does advisors follow up?
Very, very good question. So it really depends on the content of the flag. For example, if it's an attendance flag or a performance flag, the flag goes up by the faculty member. I get it, the student gets it. I reach out to the student. Hey, Abe, guess what? Saw the flag, what's up? Come see me. Text me, call me, whatever it is, right? He's a basketball player, for example. A 16-year-old that I'm supposed to mother. And I said, Abe, what's up? I see two flags here. One's academic, one's attendance. What's going on? I can't close that flag out because I don't know if he's going to go back to class or if he's performing. So that would be a faculty-based flag that gets closed out by a faculty member. Okay? An unable to contact flag could be raised by a faculty member or myself, but whoever is the one that gets the right contact information, puts it in the system, closes that flag out. We have a whole hierarchy. It's a 4-page front and back piece that shows you who the alert goes to, who can, put the alert out, who closes it, various models. Yes?
Do your faculty, 30 credits plus, do they advise in their discipline? And can you talk a little bit about how you train them on transfer?
Mm-hmm. So yes, they do advise in their discipline. They're content experts. And in terms of transfer, we have transfer modules in terms of our advisement, face-to-face and online. Our transfer counselor also has meetings with our faculty members face-to-face. A lot of it's face-to-face because, again, it's that fear factor. They don't feel they're experts in transfer. However, we're building it. And they feel more comfortable with us going to them than them coming to us. I know it sounds crazy, but.
So can you talk about, from the perspective of them being assigned disciplines, equity, right? So you have 10 English majors on campus, but 50 computer science.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have, it's not an exact science. For example, in the CJ division, one of our largest divisions, those faculty members have anywhere from 20 to 42 people, right? Computer science, not as large, they have anywhere from 10 to 20 people. And right now, we have a ceiling of 30 for a faculty member. And we don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent, but that's how we're trying it. We have to do baby steps here. Education, we only have a couple faculty members in education, so they have a higher caseload, but we're very collaborative. Some of our cohort-based advising, they have their students, no matter if they're 30 and under or 30 and over, so that takes off the slack for some of the content experts. I didn't bring the hierarchy chart because it would be way too overwhelming, and it's very hard to talk about unless you're living it. I can share that with you, and we can put it online. But it's as equitable as it can be. Sometimes our faculty members who are in charge of programs, like our communications program has 4 different tracks, that faculty member wants everybody, 30 and under, 30 over 30. So we do have some customization here. And it's how comfortable they feel. Yes, Kathy. Yes, so absolutely. So we have 3 of them, 1 per division, and they are basically generalists and they're experts. And they have a caseload of anywhere from 200 to 275. One does have 300 because until we hire our HSI STEM advisors, they kind of have an overload from that perspective. We just secured a HSI STEM grant, Hispanic Serving Institution, STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math. And those 3 advisors will be housed in the CAS Center with me. And they're going to look for students that are underrepresented STEM students. So that's going to take away from that department about 750 students. But right now, it's dispersed by the SDAs because we don't have them on campus yet. They're going to come in about 2 weeks. But these student development advisors act as liaisons between the dean and the students, the dean and the faculty, and they're both generalists and experts, believe it or not. They wear many hats. Oh no, they're 12 months. Oh no, they're 12. They take care of the faculty course caseload when the faculty aren't teaching, in summer and winter as well. And again, this is not rocket science, but in no way, shape, or form is this exact. This is what we've done so far, and it seems to be working. We're every month at our GP meetings, we talk about it. We look at our needle. We see, okay, where can we tweak? What needs to be done? We just can't seem to figure out how to pull the outliers in and the naysayers. We still haven't figured that out yet, and we want them as a part of our team. We keep getting the cold shoulder, or they'll say, I don't have any more time. Or, meanwhile, the GP teams meet every Wednesday. So if your advisement, that's the first Wednesday, technology, second Wednesday, it's only an hour and a half out of your month. We're not talking a lot of time, but we have to figure that out. How do we include more? This next step, we're going to include students over the summer so they can be with us for next year because it's really important to have that student perspective. Yes, we talk to them, we hear anecdotal stories, but we really want them to be more involved and more active. So we're trying to gain more student participation in each of our GP teams. But I can't tell you how happy we were to adopt GP and to utilize those teams to make this new model come to fruition. And really that technology tool, the 2 technology tools that we're using, Starfish, again, we unveiled it in September of 16. We're going to do student ed planning September of 17. We really firmly believe those tools are just invaluable. They're not panaceas, but they're invaluable. And again, if we go to the place of comfort to our faculty or whoever it is that is on the fence or fearful, that has worked. Thank God. Anybody else? Yes. Oh, it was our retention from fall to spring, 51% to 77%. From December 16 to January 17, 1 month. Now, I will tell you, part of that was Starfish. Part of it was intrusive outreach. The other piece was faculty members in December, before finals, actually saying, okay, guess what? Kathy, I see that you haven't course selected yet for spring. Let's talk about that. Let me walk you over to enrollment. Let me walk you over to advisement. Let me check out who your advisor. Let's go on Starfish for a minute, and let's look at your success network. So we did many, many, many multiple outreach efforts, but we raised the bar, which is very important. And we can only attribute it to the new way we advise, intrusive advisement, intensive support, Starfish, and personal outreach. Yes? Oh boy, technical. That's a good question. Everybody goes in and authenticates through Blackboard to make it easier. I'm glad that's all it was because I'm not really a technical person. I was sweating on that one. Anybody else? Well, hopefully I gave you some eye-opening information. At least you might be able to try or at least try and empower people on your campus. The most important thing is really having those tough conversations and really pushing the needle, but having everybody in the room. So you got to get the right people on the bus. Thanks.